Welcome to the Conservation Corps video on supervision part 2. By the way, if you haven't seen part 1, the video part 1, I would strongly suggest that you watch that before continuing on with this video, because this video builds on the concepts presented in the first video, and it won't really make too much sense if you haven't seen the first video. Well, and by the way, of course, if you're watching this individually, you realize you can stop the video anytime you want and pause and take notes or get a cup of coffee or do whatever you want and come back and turn it on again. All right, so in part 1, we talked about a definition of supervision within the context of the Conservation Corps. And then we talked about the importance of change, the concept of change, and the implications that it has for supervision. Supervisors are interested in working with individuals and facilitating them change in them so that they're learning something, and learning is defined as a permanent change in behavior. Then you took a behavior change survey, and that should have given you some insight into the theoretical assumptions you make about how change takes place within an individual, or how individuals learn. And then we looked at the behavior change continuum, which presented 3 psychosocial theories about different assumptions about how people change. The inner position, where people are operating from a rational inner force that's looking to get out, and the supervisor's role there is to be facilitating, or what was called a relationship listening position. The position that assumes that individuals change by external conditions, like reinforcement and stimulation externally. That's a totally opposite position than the internal one. And then there is a middle position, which is the interaction position. And each of those has a sort of a different role for the supervisor. If it's the internal approach, then you're relationship listening. If it's the external approach, then you're what was referred to as rules, rewards, punishments. And the middle position was considered confronting and contracting. And those were the 3 psycho theories that we talked about. Now, in this video, we're going to look at supervision as assigned social authority, and we're going to discuss 5 faces of social authority and the implications for supervision. And then we're going to try and tie the whole thing together, the 2 videos together, in what's called a situational model of supervision. So let's take a look here. This was the definition that was presented in video 1. Supervision is the active process of directing and guiding, influencing, changing, shaping the outcome of a subordinate's performance or behavior. And we talked about change and the importance of that. Now, for this video, I want to talk about this part of the definition. Generally, supervisors are assigned social authority over subordinates under their charge. And I want to talk about the concept of social authority. I think in 1959, 2 psychologists, John French and Bertram Raven, identified 5 underlying bases of power or social authority, or legitimate use of force. And here are the 5. There is coercive power or authority. There is reward power or transactional power. There is legitimate power or official power. There is expert power, which is based on knowledge or information that an individual has. And there is what's called referent power, which is principle-centered power. We're going to discuss each of these, or I'm going to discuss each of these, and talk about the implications. By the way, all 5 forms of power at one time or another are effective, can be very effective. And at other times, not so effective, and we'll take a look. And the first one, we can divide the power and authority into formal power, which relates to your position as a supervisor, not so much to you, but your position. And that's coercive, reward power, and legitimate power or official power. And then there is a power base that relates to your person as a supervisor, you as an individual. And that's expert power and referent power. And we'll talk about each of those. Okay, coercive power, based on threats, consequences, and it's associated in terms of how people look at change. It's associated with the outer position of rules, rewards, and punishments. Now, coercive power can be extremely effective, especially if you have to stop the bleeding in a situation. You can use coercive power. You can coerce individuals by punishing them or threatening them and things like that. And it may work, but in the short term, it doesn't really work in the long term. And it's a weak form of power or social control. A weak form because as soon as you lose the ability to punish or to intimidate, you lose the ability, you lose your power. And the members do not freely give you this power. They don't freely give you this power. It's just sort of, they're intimidated, and so they go along with the situation. So it's a relatively weak form of social control. However, it does have its place, and it can be very effective in the short term. So that's coercive power. That's one of the formal powers that has to do with your position. Another formal power is reward power. And that's based on the ability to reward individuals or withhold rewards. And this can be very, very effective in the short run. After all, most people like praise and thanks or some type of reward. However, like coercive power, it is a very weak form of social control. Because as soon as you lose the ability to reward, you lose your control or your power. And the group does not freely give you this. It's cajoled out of them because they're going to get a reward. So they don't freely hand over the power. So again, it's a weak form of social control, although it has its place and can be very, very effective if used appropriately. Third form of formal power is legitimate power or official power. There are certain roles in our society or positions in our society that it doesn't matter what individual fills the role, it's the role itself that ascribes social authority or power. The examples here are a judge, policeman, military rank. Now the group members do not freely, it's not given freely by group members. So it is a strong form of control, but not totally strong. And there needs to be a respect for the position because it may be culturally based. So the only example I'm thinking now is, let's say a particular religious sect may have a priest or or whatever. And if you don't ascribe to that religion, well, then you're not going to ascribe power to that individual. However, the proponents of the religion certainly would ascribe power to the individual. So it might be culturally based. That's legitimate power. Now, in terms of the personal power bases, there is expert power, or power that's based on knowledge and based on experience and skill in one area, or the perception of that. People may have a perception that you're an expert and will then treat you like an expert. This is a very powerful form of social control. If the individuals that you supervise see you as an expert, they will freely give you social control, as long as the area of your expertise remains relevant to them. It's possible it could diminish over time. And also, As the need for the expertise lessens, so does the authority. However, if there is a need for the authority and the individuals that you supervise see you as an expert, that is a very powerful form of social control, and they freely give it to you. And the final one, which is a personal source of power also, is called referent power. People will refer to you. That's where the word comes from, referent. And it's principle-centered. And it's based on people seeing you as trustworthy, respectful. They admire you. You have personal integrity. And you inspire others. And they also have a desire to be like you. This is a very, very powerful form of social control. If individuals see you as caring, respectful, honest, open, and out for their best interest, they will freely give you power, and they'll run through walls for you. It's the strongest form of social control or social power, is if you are viewed as a referent. So if your subordinates view you as either an expert or in a legitimate position or referent, they will freely give you social control. Those are three very strong forms of social control. All right, now, this is just a review. 3 formal power bases: coercive, which is it's useful, but a weak form. Reward, useful, but sort of a weak form also. Legitimate can be very strong, especially if you are viewed as legitimate. And then expert and referent, as we discussed. Well, okay, well, what does all of this mean? These 2 videos that we've talked about change and learning and theoretical positions about and philosophical positions about change. Now we've talked about the bases of power. How does all of this relate to supervision? Well, we're going to try and put it all together here. Now I realize this looks a little daunting, but I'll try to give a reasonable explanation of it. This is called a situational approach to supervision. Situational approach to supervision. In other words, it's based on situational circumstances. Well, let's take a look. First of all, let's take a look at the horizontal axis here. This is directive behavior on the part of a supervisor. Directive behavior, giving directions, telling people what to do and things like that. And you'll notice at this end, it's low directive behavior by the supervisor, and at this end, it's high directive behavior. Now here, on the vertical axis, we have supportive behavior by the supervisor. And at this end, it would be high supportive behavior. And at this end, we have low supportive behavior. And we have 4 quadrants, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Well, this quadrant would represent high directive behavior by the supervisor and sort of lower supportive behavior. So this quadrant is high directive behavior, lower supportive behavior. This quadrant, well, it's high directive behavior and it's high supportive behavior. This quadrant is sort of the lower directive behavior, it's down at this end, but high supportive behavior. And this quadrant, lower directive behavior and lower supportive behavior. And finally, up here, we have knowledge, skill, resource level of participants that we supervise. This is the knowledge, skill, and resource level of the participants that we supervise. And at this end, we have low knowledge, skill, and resources, and at this end, individuals who have a good deal of knowledge, a good deal of skill, and a lot of resources. Q1 here is the lowest readiness. This is participants that we're working with that are at the low readiness. These in Q2 represents lower, not the lowest, but still low readiness. Q3 is a higher readiness, and Q4 is the highest readiness. Now let's see how this plays out. Okay, Q1, lowest readiness. We're working with individuals at low readiness in terms of their knowledge, skill, and resource levels. This is called directing, control, and manage. So if you're working with individuals that have low readiness skills, then you probably want to engage in directing and controlling and managing behaviors. These individuals present low readiness and low competence. You're using high direction and lower support. You're more towards direction. You're giving support. You're not withholding support, but your directions and management seem to be the key thing. Structure and control and supervise. Those are your roles. Use a lot of directive statements. And your power base, you're probably working from the coercive and reward power base initially. Of course, you're always moving to try and get to expert and referent, but you may have to start out encountering the individuals at the level where they are. And your change ideology, you're probably operating from the rules, rewards, and punishment philosophical position. Let's take a look at quadrant 2. Okay, now here, this is not the lowest readiness, but it's lower. And this is referred to as teaching and coaching. So your role here is as a teacher and a coach. You're using high direction and high support here. You're working with individuals with lower readiness and lower confidence, not totally low, but lower. You're coaching and modeling. Your power base is probably rewards and rules. Rewards and rules. And again, you're always trying to move and have your participants move towards expert and referent. And you're probably engaging in confronting and contracting. And your change ideology is probably rules and rewards. You're using a lot of rules and rewards. And you're using some cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. And we will discuss those. So here, Q1, where you're working with your lowest readiness, you're directing, controlling, and managing. Q2, you're teaching and coaching. Let's take a look at Q3. Now, Q3, you're working with individuals who are at a higher readiness, not the highest, but higher readiness. So here, your role is probably as a supportive mentor. And see, you're high on the supportive behaviors and you're a little lower on the directive behaviors. Lower direction, high support. High readiness, higher readiness, higher competence. You're using a lot of praise, listening, facilitating. You're using confronting and contraction. Your power base is probably legitimate, expert, or referent. And your change ideology is probably on the relationship listening side. The relationship listening side. And Q4, here you have the highest readiness level. You're working with individuals with high knowledge, high skills, and a good deal of resources. And here your role is more empowering and delegating. You're stepping out of the way here. You're low direction and you're low support. So lower relationship, lower task, highest readiness group at highest competence can make positive decisions on their own. Independence, you're leading them towards independence. Your power base is you're probably viewed as referent, expert, and legitimate. And your change ideology is relationship and listening. So This is a model that sort of sets us or gives us something we may be able to hold on to in terms of the skill, knowledge, and resource level of the individuals we're working with, and what is the best way to interact with individuals who are at the lowest readiness, the lower readiness, the higher readiness, and the highest readiness. So this model then presents a way of looking at that in terms of its situation. So it depends on the situation as to what role you're going to take as a supervisor. Are you going to be directing, controlling, and managing? Are you going to be teaching and coaching? Are you going to be a supportive mentor, or are you empowering or delegating? Well, okay, that's about it. Now, of course, this is not written in stone. This is just an idea that I'd like you to look at and to consider to see if it has usefulness for you. Well, okay. Again, I'm going to ask you for some feedback, if that is okay. If you wouldn't mind responding and putting your stuff in a Word document and emailing to me, I would greatly appreciate that. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.